Lovely and beautiful souls. My name is Jacob, and I want to begin by saying thank you actually for being here today. It's actually it's really warming to see a community come together to explore how chronic healing and chronic psychotherapy can support addiction and recovery. Um, like I was said, I'm an associate certified chronic healer, and over the years, I've had the honor of working with individuals facing many forms of struggle, including addiction. Today, I want to share a presentation that's very close to my heart. With how addiction and mental health are deeply interconnected and how chronic psychotherapy can actually become a powerful ally in healing both those things. Before we begin, I do want to give thanks to Grandmaster Charles Crooksby is for his wisdom and his teachings today that we are able to continue to illuminate the path of energy healing across the whole world. And his work reminds us that not only that healing is not only possible, but is a gift that is accessible to anyone who's willing to learn it. And so today we will be exploring energy healing and compassion, and how compassion can reshape the journey of recovery, not just treating addiction as a condition, but understanding the person beneath it. So the idea of treating addiction, we often think of it as a battle, a struggle between willpower and weakness, or a problem that needs to be fixed. But addiction isn't simply about substance or habits. It's a complex interplay between the mind, the emotions, the body, and the energy system. It's how a person tries to consciously or unconsciously regulate pain, to fill a void, or find a sense of relief from suffering. In traditional psychotherapy, they look at psychological roots, trauma, attachment wounds, emotional dysregulation. And in medicine, they look at the neurochemistry in the brain. But what chronic psychotherapy adds is the understanding that conditions are also energetic. Addiction can addiction can be seen as an energy that's become congested, emotions and thoughts that are looping in the aura and the chakras. It's also feeding cravings and compulsions. The person isn't just physically dependent; their energy body is also dependent on that too. So when we approach healing, we're not just asking how do we stop this behavior. We're really asking what pain is the person trying to silence, what energy is stuck, and how can we help it move and heal. Treating addiction this way becomes less about control and more about compassion, about healing someone and helping them come back into alignment with their true self. And that brings me to someone whose story I want to share with you today, someone I've had the honor of working with on their recovery journey. Now, before I begin, I know when people hear the word energy healing, they might think of like chakras and crystals levitating in midair and stuff like that. I promise you, this is going to be more down to earth. This is going to be just as magical, though, of a transformation. So I really want to introduce you to Jane. This is not her real name, of course. This is an alias that I gave her. But I first met Jane when I was a kid, and this was at a friends and family gathering. I remember her as this bright, warm, and bubbly person. She was always laughing and always smiling. She had this energy that could light up a whole room. And as a child, I really admired that about her. As I grew older, I really started to know some changing happening around her, especially as a teen. I started to realize that she was struggling with addiction, specifically with alcoholism. The laughter that was still there, it started to feel heavier. It wasn't as genuine anymore, and I started to understand that she was starting to use alcohol as a way to cope with things that she didn't know how to face. Watching her go through that was very difficult for me, especially since she was really someone I cared about and close to me. I wanted to support her, but I didn't know how growing up. And it wasn't until many years later that I became a chronic healer and got trained in psychotherapy, that I reached out to her. And when I did, I offered to work with her, not as a client, but as someone I deeply wanted to help. And to my surprise, she was open and hopeful and ready to try something different. So in March of 2022, we actually began our healing journey together, combining chronic psychotherapy with also her recovery work that she's already doing. Now, like many people who like many people who struggle with addiction, Jane didn't grow up with the best ways to cope with stress or emotional pain. Her life included moments of trauma, instability, and challenges that left her feeling unsupported. As she got older, symptoms of depression and ADHD made it even harder for her to manage her emotions. Without healthy coping skills or access to or mental health support, she eventually turned to alcohol as a way for relief. Even though it was momentarily escape, it was a way for her to kind of get outside the noise and the pain that was inside of her. We started as a no, it started as an occasional drinking. It slowly became dependency. Alcohol became her way of coping, her way of getting through the day. And like many people in similar situations, she tried to get better. This was through therapy, recovery programs, and through medication. But the alcohol lessens the effectiveness of like antidepressants and stuff like that. So it really, those things really felt her leaving hopeless and just stuck. And so by the time her and I started working together, she wasn't just struggling with addiction, she was also struggling to believe that healing was even possible. And that's where chronic psychotherapy became a new doorway to help her find hope again. Which reminds me that here, like when I hear Jane's story, um, she really made me realize that addiction isn't just a struggle about substance. It's a struggle that's also uh, deeply tied to mental health. When I began looking into the connection between addiction and mental health, I discovered that nearly half the people who face substance use challenges also live with a co-occurring mental health condition, such as depression, anxiety, or even ADHD. In fact, those with ADHD um, are significantly more likely to develop a dependency on alcohol or another substance. Um, what this shows us is that addiction doesn't happen in isolation. It grows from unaddressed emotional pain, trauma, or neurodivergent patterns that make daily life harder to navigate. And yet, so many people who seek treatment only for their addiction without getting no, a lot of them seek treatment for their addiction, but don't get support for their mental health. And Jane's experience reminded me that recovery needs to be addressed at both. The mind and the emotions need to be addressed, not just the behavior. Because when we treat one without the other, healing can only go so far, right? Which is when we come back to Jane's story, it becomes clear that her addiction wasn't the real problem. It was the symptoms of something much deeper. Her depression, ADHD, and unresolved trauma all wove together into a cycle of, temporary numbness, you could say, but nothing was ever healed. She sought out help before, like I said, through therapy programs and through medication, but antidepressants lessens those medications. And so while she was feeling like she was getting better, is also like she was taking one step forward and two steps back, is what she would say. And so she put in a lot of effort, but it was the energetic and the mental bodies being out of balance for her. So this time I approached things differently. Instead of treating Jane just at the addiction, we treated Jane as a person. We focused on healing her as a person behind the condition. And this is something I do now because a friend once told me that in pranic healing, we're not treating the condition, we're healing the person. And that's exactly what we did. Through pranic psychotherapy, we began to gently clear the emotional and energetic roots of her suffering. Over time, the symptoms started to fade, but even more importantly, Jane began to remember her own strength, her worth, and her light. Which leads us to pranic psychotherapy in action. In psychotherapy, we often learn that the more energy or intention we give to a thought or emotion, the stronger it becomes. I like to imagine it like a balloon. So every time we feed that negative thought or craving, the more it expands. Over time, that balloon, it can grow so large that it begins to dominate the person's inner world. It becomes the only thing that they can focus on. That craving, the shame, and the self-doubt, it just consumes space where peace and clarity should be. Through pranic psychotherapy, we gently release the negative energy fueling those balloons, the anger, guilt, and emotional pain that feeds this addiction. We then remove it and replace it with fresh pranic energy and positive reinforcing thoughts. Um, As this process continues, those overinflated balloons, the cravings, the negative self-talk, the energy of addiction, they begin to deflate. And as they lose their power, the person starts to feel lighter, clearer, and more in control. So session by session, we guide clients through the process of helping them integrate the emotional release and supporting them in and rebuild their own sense of self. And that's when we began to see real changes in Jane. Her cravings started to fade, her energy felt calmer, and she began reconnecting with parts of herself that she had lost along the way. And relapse is one of those things that I was really worried about. In addiction recovery, relapse is incredibly common. Studies show that nearly 60% of people who will experience it at least once. And for those with a mental health condition, that likelihood is even more likely to happen. So I knew that I wanted to uh, help her help her recovery last longer, right? And to make sure it was permanent. We couldn't just stop when the cravings were gone. We had to help her rebuild her energy system for her emotional resilience and her mindset so that when challenges came again, she'd have tools to face them. That is where Pranic psychotherapy became essential. It didn't just help clear the addiction energy, it helped strengthen the energy centers related to willpower, emotional stability, and mental clarity. And by continuing our sessions beyond the initial healing, we focus on helping Jane stay balanced, centered, and confident in her recovery. And slowly we began to see different kind of Jane, one that wasn't just about drinking, it was about truly learning who she was again and loving herself again. Which, as our sessions continued, the changes in Jane became undeniable. The cravings that once controlled her started to fade, and she began to feel more in tune with herself again. Over time, she stopped reaching for alcohol altogether. Instead, she focused on her own emotional healing, learning how to process her feelings, express herself, and rebuild her confidence. One of the most beautiful moments for me was seeing her smile again. Honestly, it was such a beautiful thing, especially since it was a smile that I remembered as a kid. It was just more genuine. It wasn't a fake smile. Um, and she began to put herself together. She went back to therapy. She set up healthy boundaries again, and she also enrolled in school. She's going to become a doctor now. Now, almost 2 years later that we finished our healing sessions together, she still remains alcohol free and continues to rebuild her life with clarity and purpose. Her journey reminds me a lot of that recovery isn't just about stopping a behavior. It's about rediscovering the person underneath the pain. Through Pranic psychotherapy, Jane found the strength to see herself as a whole again, and that's something medicine couldn't give her at that time. Watching her transform has also transformed me. It reminded me why I do this work and why I love to do it, to help people remember their own inner light and guide them back to themselves, which is reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Master Choa. And this is from the Sutra of Compassionate Objectivity, is the negative self-image about yourself is not you. The negative image created by other people about you is not you. This quote reminds me so much of Jane's journey because for so long, her self-image was clouded by shame, judgment, and pain. But it also makes me think about how we as a society view those struggling with addiction. Grandmaster Choa takes a look at a person with uses the quote and teaches us that we need to see beyond the behaviors, beyond the labels, and into their true essence. Too often communities see someone as only an addict rather than a person as a whole. Complex persons with emotionally charged experiences and fear and emotions, this really makes them feel outcasted in society. Though it's rooted in love and understanding to protect themselves, it still makes that person feel even worse. And so in Jane's community, they did outcast her. And they only saw her as an addiction, which made things even worse for her. So when we finally began to see people holistically through the lens of energy, compassion, and their inherent goodness, we start to create space for true healing. And that to me is the essence of Pranic psychotherapy. And that's my vision for the future. I use Jane's story as a way to hope for the future of Pranic psychotherapy is going to be used hand in hand with traditional treatment plans for addiction. That Pranic psychotherapy will one day become an integral part of recovery programs, working with every type of therapies programs and medical treatments, and just community support in general. By not just addressing the mind and the body, but also addressing the energetic body. Recovery becomes a journey of true transformation rather than simply symptom management. Because chronic healing doesn't just treat the condition, it heals the person. It brings together energy, psychology, and compassion into a holistic framework of recovery. And that's all I have today. That's everything I have. And again, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Allison and everyone at the Bucks County Pranic Healing Center and Grandmaster Chokesui, especially for his timeless teachings that brought us all here today to listen to everyone's stories and their experiences. So thank you, everyone, and may everyone have a blessed, no, everyone be blessed with loving kindness.